Earth did not answer the galaxy after the crime happened, and that silence was louder than any scream because the atrocity was clear to everyone who saw it as human cities burned without warning and hospitals collapsed into dust while alien ships watched from the sky without mercy and the galaxy waited for Earth to cry or beg or threaten, but none of that came because humanity did something far more dangerous, which was nothing at all. As news spread across Earth and screens showed broken streets, empty schools, and the faces of people who would never speak again, and still there were no speeches from leaders, no angry messages sent to the stars, only silence that grew heavier with every passing hour while alien councils laughed and said humans were emotional and weak and would break soon like they always did because history told them humans talked too much and forgave too easily, but this time was different because deep underground and far from cameras humans were not crying, they were watching and recording and remembering as generals and scientists and leaders from every nation stood together without flags or borders and looked at the same images again and again, not to feel pain, but to remove it because anger made mistakes and humans were done making mistakes, as one voice finally spoke, not loud and not angry but calm and cold, saying Earth will not respond today, and that single sentence confused everyone because the galaxy expected rage, but rage was loud and this silence was sharp. As days passed and no human ships moved and no weapons fired and alien commanders began to relax thinking the attack had worked and Earth had been broken, but what they did not see was that humanity had gone quiet before every great war in its history, because humans learned long ago that silence was not weakness, it was focus, and during that silence old rules were read again, laws written after terrible wars were unlocked, and systems long buried were powered on for the first time as humanity remembered why it had limited itself in the first place, because humans knew what they could do when survival was the only law, and faraway alien observers noticed strange things like human satellites changing orbit and deep space stations waking from sleep and factories running day and night without news coverage, and still no message came from Earth, and that scared some races because silence meant planning and planning meant intent, while on Earth people mourned quietly, lighting candles and holding hands, but even in grief there was a shared understanding that something had changed because parents did not tell children that everything would be fine anymore. They told them to be strong and remember who they were because the idea of peace had been burned away with the cities, and when the alien council finally sent a message mocking Earth and calling the attack a lesson, there was still no reply, and that was the moment some of the older races began to worry because they remembered stories of early humanity when humans were young and angry and hard to stop, and they wondered what happened to that species and why it had chosen kindness for so long until now, when Earth's global command met in one room for the first time and no one argued because the choice was already made, and a human leader said the words that ended an era, saying we stayed civilized because we believed everyone deserved a chance, and that belief died with our people, and no one disagreed as systems labeled forbidden were marked active, and weapons once called unethical were reclassified as necessary, and for the first time Earth was no longer divided by fear or pride, but united by loss, while the galaxy continued to wait for a message that never came, and alien citizens went on with their lives unaware that they were already living in the final days of human restraint, because Earth had not forgiven and Earth had not forgotten, it had simply stopped talking, and when at last the silence ended, it was not with words, but with movement, as something ancient and powerful shifted across human space, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, because humanity was done explaining and done asking and done pretending to be something it was not, and the quiet that followed the crime was not the calm before peace, it was the calm before Earth chose war. Before the galaxy learned to fear Earth, it had learned to misunderstand it, because humans were not born peaceful and civilization was not their natural state, but a hard choice made after centuries of blood and fire, as humanity once tore itself apart in wars that scarred the planet and taught painful lessons, and when humans finally reached the stars they carried those lessons with them, choosing rules, limits, and laws not because they were weak but because they were afraid of themselves, and Earth promised the galaxy that it would be different, that it would be calm, fair, and civilized, and for a long time it was, as humans followed galactic law even when it hurt them and accepted losses without revenge and turned the other cheek when provoked, because they believed peace was stronger than power, and that belief shaped every human action as they restricted their weapons, slowed their fleets, and spoke carefully in councils while other races watched and quietly judged, seeing only hesitation where there was restraint, and kindness where there was control, and some aliens respected humans for it, while others saw an opportunity and began to test them with small attacks, trade manipulation, and border pressure, and every time Earth answered with talks, warnings, and compromise, because humans remembered what unchecked violence had done to their own world, and they refused to become that again, even when their ships were destroyed and their people killed in distant systems. Humans stayed within the rules and punished only what the law allowed, earning a reputation across the galaxy as predictable and safe and boring, while inside Earth frustration grew quietly, because soldiers trained for wars they were never allowed to fight, and engineers built machines they were never allowed to use, and leaders carried the weight of knowing what humanity could do if it ever stopped holding back, and they prayed that day would never come as generations passed and the galaxy grew more crowded and more cruel. And new races rose that did not share humanity's history or fears, and they laughed at human speeches about unity and law, calling them outdated and naive, and when humans spoke of consequences they were ignored, because no one believed Earth would ever act beyond words, and that belief spread until the final atrocity felt inevitable to those who understood patterns of power, because predators always test boundaries and humans had drawn theirs too softly, and when the attack came and civilians died. The galaxy expected the same response as always: sadness, anger, speeches, and talks, but Earth did none of that, because the truth was that civilization had been a shield humanity used to protect everyone else from itself, and now that shield was cracked and humans were forced to look again at their past, not with shame, but with clarity, realizing that restraint only works when others choose it too, and that peace without balance becomes permission. And in the days after the crime, old records were opened, and forgotten lessons studied again, showing how humanity once survived impossible odds by adapting faster, fighting harder, and enduring longer than any enemy, and leaders admitted to each other that they had hidden that truth from the galaxy, hoping it would never be needed, because once unleashed it could not be easily stopped, and that was why Earth stayed civilized for so long, because humans knew their own darkness and feared becoming monsters. More than losing battles, but standing among the ruins of their cities, that fear faded and was replaced by something colder and clearer, which was responsibility, because allowing evil to go unanswered was not mercy, it was neglect, and a quiet agreement spread across Earth that if humanity was to be feared again, it would be feared for a reason, and not for cruelty. As the galaxy watched human silence, and tried to read it, many failed to understand that the calm was not confusion but acceptance of a hard truth, that rules are agreements, not guarantees, and when one side breaks them, the other must choose whether to pretend or respond, and Earth had finished pretending, because civilization was never a weakness, it was a choice, and choices can change, and while aliens debated politics and power, humans prepared with purpose, remembering every reason they had once put limits on themselves, and choosing to remove them one by one, not out of rage, but out of necessity, because the age of patience had ended, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had worked so hard to keep themselves civilized for so long. The galaxy would later pretend the line was unclear, but in truth everyone knew exactly when it was crossed, because the atrocity was not an accident or a battle gone wrong, it was a choice made with time and intent, as alien fleets entered human space and ignored every warning and targeted places with no defenses, choosing cities, school shelters, and medical zones, because they wanted to send a message, and that message was fear. As orbital weapons fired with perfect accuracy and buildings fell in waves and fires spread through streets where there were no soldiers, only families, and the attack continued long after resistance was gone, as if stopping would have felt like mercy, and mercy was not part of the plan, and across Earth millions watched the footage in real time, unable to look away as emergency signals went silent one by one, and when the smoke cleared nothing was left but broken land and echoes, and the galaxy reacted with careful words, calling it a tragedy, a conflict, an unfortunate escalation. But humans did not use those words, because humans knew the difference between war and slaughter, and that difference mattered, and inside Earth's command chambers no one shouted or cursed, because anger had already passed, and what remained was something far more dangerous, which was certainty, as leaders replayed the recordings again and again, noting targets, patterns, and timing, and understanding that this was not about territory or resources, it was about dominance and humiliation, and a quiet realization spread that the enemy did not want peace or victory, they wanted submission, and humans had learned long ago that submission only invites worse things. As one commander finally spoke and said, "They did not hit our military," and that sentence changed the room, because everyone understood what it meant, that the line was not crossed by damage or death, but by intent, and the intent had been to erase innocence, and that was the one thing humanity had always sworn to protect, even during its darkest wars. And when that promise was broken, something ancient inside the human mind awakened, because humans can forgive attacks and losses, but they do not forgive those who choose to hurt the defenseless, and across Earth memorials formed without instruction, and candles burned through the night, and people stood together in silence, not demanding answers, because they already felt them, and children asked why this happened, and parents struggled to explain that some beings mistake kindness for weakness and must be taught otherwise. And while the galaxy debated responsibility, Earth studied consequences, and analysts confirmed what many already knew, that the aliens had calculated Earth's response based on past behavior, expecting protest and delay and negotiation, and that calculation became their greatest mistake, because the past no longer applied, and when a final report was delivered listing the dead and missing, the number was read once and then locked away because it was not needed anymore, as a human leader stood and spoke quietly, saying this was not a mistake, it was a message, and the message was that they believe we will endure anything without changing, and that belief ends now. And no one argued, because the room felt heavy with agreement, as systems marked red were reviewed, and protocols designed only for extinction-level threats were discussed, not with excitement, but with grim focus. And outside those rooms the galaxy still waited for a reply, and some alien leaders grew Impatient, sending taunts and warnings, believing pressure would force Earth back to the table, unaware that tables were no longer part of the plan. And as days passed and human silence continued, fear began to creep into the edges of alien space, because intelligence reports showed Earth was not collapsing but reorganizing, and human fleets were not retreating but repositioning, and defense networks were expanding far beyond treaty limits. And whispers spread that Earth had activated something old and dangerous, and those whispers reached the very race that had committed the crime, and for the first time doubt appeared among them as they reviewed human history deeper than before, discovering wars where humans fought on despite impossible losses and adapted until enemies vanished, and they wondered if this time they had gone too far, but it was already too late, because the line once crossed cannot be uncrossed, and Earth did not announce that the rules were over. It simply stopped following them, and when the decision was finally made, it was not dramatic or loud. It was a quiet authorization signed by every leader on the planet, stating that humanity would no longer limit itself in response to those who target the innocent, and that single document marked the end of an age, because the line that was never meant to be crossed had been crossed openly, proudly, and without regret, and the galaxy was about to learn that when humans decide there is nothing left to lose, they become something no treaty can contain and no empire can survive. The moment Earth stopped asking for permission was not announced to the galaxy, because humans no longer needed approval for survival, and that shift was felt first inside their own systems, as old laws were suspended and restrictions written after past wars were quietly removed without ceremony or debate, because debate was a luxury for peaceful times, and peace was gone as human commanders opened sealed archives and found weapons, designs that had never been built, strategies that had never been used in scenarios that had never been allowed, because they were considered too final and too cruel, and yet now they were studied not with joy but with acceptance, because the enemy had chosen a path that left no room for gentle answers, and across Earth factories changed purpose overnight, producing machines not for defense but for decisive action, and scientists stopped asking if they should and focused only on how fast they could, while fleets that once patrolled politely now moved with intent, taking positions beyond treaty borders and no longer reporting their movements to galactic monitors, and when those monitors demanded explanations, Earth gave none, because explanation implies equality, and humans had moved beyond that stage as alien observers watched with growing concern, noticing how human ships traveled in formations they did not recognize, and how communication patterns went dark, and how Earth's military traffic surged without a single public statement, and some alien leaders tried to pressure Earth by invoking galactic law, but the laws had lost meaning the moment civilians were targeted, and Earth no longer felt bound by rules written by those who could not enforce them fairly, and within human command rooms decisions were made quickly and cleanly without shouting or fear, because everyone understood the cost of hesitation and the need for clarity, and a simple principle guided every order, which was that humanity would strike first only once, but that strike would make future resistance impossible, and this was not revenge, it was prevention, because humans learned long ago that unfinished wars always return, and they had no intention of repeating that mistake, as intelligence reports flowed in, mapping enemy systems, supply lines, and political centers, and revealing weaknesses that had been ignored for decades, because no one believed humans would ever use them, and now those weaknesses were highlighted and prioritized and marked for action, and still Earth said nothing publicly, which frustrated and confused the galaxy, because power without words is unsettling and silence without fear is terrifying, and some alien races began to distance themselves, quietly shutting down trade routes and recalling diplomats, sensing that a storm was coming and wanting no part of it, while others dismissed the signs, believing that humans were bluffing and that their history of restraint proved they would stop before crossing a true point of no return. But they misunderstood that humans had crossed that point internally the moment they decided permission was no longer required, because asking implies respect, and respect must be mutual, and as Earth prepared its first move, human media remained silent, no heroic stories, no speeches, no flags waving, because this was not a moment for pride, and civilians were not told details, only that change was coming, and that they should trust the people making decisions. And for the first time in generations they did, because grief had united them in a way politics never could, and when the final readiness report was delivered, it was brief, stating that all systems were active and all targets were confirmed, and that human losses were expected but acceptable because survival had a price, and leaders signed off without hesitation, knowing that delay would only invite more suffering. And somewhere deep in space, alien commanders finally realized something was wrong when long-range sensors detected anomalies they could not explain, and attempts to contact Earth were met with nothing, and fear spread not as panic, but as uncertainty, because uncertainty is the enemy of control, and the galaxy was losing control of the narrative and of the situation. And when an alien diplomat finally asked a simple question, why is Earth not responding, the answer from a human analyst was colder than any threat, which was because there is nothing left to discuss, and that truth settled heavily across the stars, because discussion ends when decisions are made and decisions had been made unanimously by a species that had tried every other option and found them wanting, and as Earth's fleets moved into final positions and weapon systems aligned with distant coordinates, humanity did not feel anger or hatred, only focus and resolve, because this was not about proving strength, it was about ending a pattern and ensuring that no one would ever again believe that harming the innocent was without consequence. And when the first human fleet crossed the invisible boundary into enemy space, it did so without fanfare, without warning, and without permission, and the galaxy held its breath, because the age of asking was over and the age of consequences had begun. The first target was not chosen because it was the strongest or the most dangerous, but because it was the most proud, and symbols matter in war more than numbers, because symbols break belief, and belief is harder to rebuild than fleets. As humanity studied the enemy alliance, they selected a world known across the galaxy as untouchable, a political center where leaders lived safely far from borders and battles, a place that had never known fear and never expected it. And when the decision was made, there was no debate, because everyone understood the message it would send, and as human fleets moved through deep space they did so with perfect discipline, silent engines, dark hulls, and no transmissions, because surprise was not a tactic, it was a principle, and alien sensors failed to detect them until it was too late, because humans had learned how to hide in the noise of the universe and used that knowledge without mercy. And when the first warning alarms sounded on the target world, commanders assumed it was an error because nothing ever happened there, and while they questioned data, human ships appeared in orbit, not in a show of force, but in precise positions already locked and ready, and still Earth said nothing because words were unnecessary. And the first strike came not as a massive blast, but as a controlled sequence, as communication hubs went dark, power grids collapsed, and defense systems shut down in perfect order, leaving the planet blind and helpless before it even understood it was under attack. And panic spread among alien leaders as they realized they could not call for help and could not negotiate because Earth was not listening. And then the second phase began as human weapons targeted military facilities, only not cities, not civilians, because the message was not cruelty, it was capability, and human strikes were clean, fast, and unstoppable, and alien defenses that had never been tested against a serious opponent failed within minutes. And across the galaxy, observers watched in shock as a world once considered secure fell into chaos without Earth firing a single uncontrolled shot. And what terrified them most was not the destruction but the restraint, because humans were showing what they could do while choosing not to do more, and that restraint carried a threat far stronger than slaughter, because it meant control, and control meant intent. And on the ground, alien commanders tried to organize resistance, but every move was anticipated, every signal intercepted, and every counter measured before it began, because humans had studied this target for years, quietly, patiently waiting for a reason, and now they had won. And as the attack continued, human fleets moved like a single mind, adapting instantly to changes and exploiting weaknesses faster than alien commanders could react, and within hours the planet's military power was neutralized without Earth losing a single ship, and that fact alone sent fear racing through the Alliance, because wars are expected to be costly, and when they are not, something is very wrong. And finally a message was sent, not to the galaxy but directly to the leaders of the target world, and it was simple and brief, stating this is a demonstration and demonstrations end when the lesson is learned. And nothing more was said, and nothing more was needed, because the lesson was clear that if Earth could do this to a protected core world without warning or resistance, then no place was truly safe. And across alien space, emergency meetings were called, and alliances questioned their assumptions about humanity, realizing too late that humans had never been weak, only patient, and patience had limits. And on Earth people watched the news in silence, seeing images of human ships holding position, not celebrating, not advancing further, and they felt a strange mix of fear and relief, because for the first time since the atrocity there was balance again, and the sense that something had been answered. And yet leaders knew this was only the beginning, because the first target was not meant to end the war, it was meant to begin it on human terms. And as the human fleets withdrew just as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving the target world broken but alive, the galaxy was left in stunned quiet, because nothing in recent history compared to what they had just witnessed, and the race that had committed the atrocity realized with growing dread that they were no longer facing a restrained civilization but a focused one, and that the rules they had relied on for safety were gone. And as reports spread and fear took root, one truth became unavoidable, that Earth had struck once and could strike again anywhere at any time. And the first target had not been chosen for revenge but for clarity, because humanity wanted the galaxy to understand that the age of ignoring human warnings was over, and that the silence after the crime had not been emptiness, it had been preparation. And now that preparation had been revealed, and the stars themselves seemed darker, knowing that Earth had finally shown what it could do and had chosen to stop playing nice. Fear did not arrive across the galaxy as screaming panic or sudden collapse. It arrived quietly, like a shadow that follows every thought, because after the first target fell no one could pretend that what happened was an accident or a warning shot that could be ignored. And across alien space, leaders replayed the footage again and again, trying to understand how a single species had achieved such perfect control in such a short time. And the answer disturbed them, because it was simple: humans had Prepared for this long before they were given a reason, and intelligence agencies rushed to uncover hidden human capabilities, digging into old archives, treaties, and forgotten conflicts, and what they found was a pattern of restraint layered over strength like armor covering a blade, and reports began to circulate describing human military history not as chaotic violence but as adaptive survival where humans lost battles, learned quickly, and returned stronger every time, and that pattern frightened those who read it because it meant that Earth would not repeat mistakes and would not stop until its objective was complete, and fear grew as alien analysts realized that humanity had not shown its full power during the first strike, only enough to make a point, and the idea of unused potential unsettled even the most confident empires because uncertainty is the greatest threat to control, and as fear spread, alliances began to fracture quietly as worlds questioned whether standing together against Earth was worth the risk, and some remembered the atrocity and wondered if their own silence had made them complicit, and that guilt mixed with fear creating hesitation, and hesitation weakened unity, while others argued that Earth must be stopped quickly before it went further, but none could agree on how because no one knew where Earth would strike next or what limits still existed if any, and attempts to gather intelligence were met with failure. As human space became darker than ever with ships disappearing from sensors and data streams collapsing without explanation, and even neutral systems began reporting strange human activity that did not match known technology, and every new report added to the feeling that humanity was operating several steps ahead of everyone else, and fear reached civilian populations as rumors spread faster than facts, and people who had never thought about humans before now whispered their name. With concern, and merchants rerouted ships away from human space, and governments increased security not because of direct threats but because fear demanded visible action, and across all of it Earth remained silent, refusing to clarify intentions or offer reassurance, and that silence became a weapon because it forced the galaxy to imagine worst-case outcomes, and imagination is far more powerful than reality, and some alien leaders attempted to reopen negotiations, sending messages filled with concern, regret, and offers of investigation, but those messages vanished unanswered, and the lack of response told a clear story that Earth was no longer interested in discussion, and that realization hit hardest among the race that committed the atrocity because they were now isolated not by force but by fear as other races distanced themselves, unwilling to share blame or consequences, and internal divisions grew as leaders argued whether to prepare for defense or seek surrender, and those arguments revealed how unprepared they truly were because their confidence had always been built on the assumption that humans would never fully respond, and now that assumption was gone and replaced by a terrifying unknown, and in that unknown every possibility felt dangerous, and Earth's own people felt the weight of the moment as well because fear was not only spreading outward but inward as families watched the galaxy react, and understood that there was no easy return from this path, and yet there was no regret because the cost of inaction had already been paid in lives. And silence had failed once and would not be allowed to fail again, and human commanders monitored alien reactions, carefully measuring fear not as an emotion but as a strategic factor because fear changes behavior and behavior reveals weakness, and as fear spread, cracks appeared in old power structures showing where pressure would have the greatest effect, and that knowledge was stored quietly for later use, and some alien races attempted shows of strength, conducting military drills and public displays meant to reassure their populations, but those displays only highlighted how little had changed because strength that needs to be shown is often strength that is uncertain, and humans understood that well and allowed the galaxy to exhaust itself with gestures while they conserved effort and focus, and as weeks passed and no further human attacks came, fear did not fade, it grew because waiting without understanding is torture, and the galaxy found itself trapped between dread and hope, unsure whether the silence meant restraint had returned or something far worse was being prepared, and the truth was that Earth was watching patiently, letting fear do the work that weapons could not, because fear reshapes decisions, erodes alliances, and reveals truth, and by the time the galaxy realized what that fear had cost them, it would already be too late because the stars were no longer a place of safety but a field of uncertainty, and in that uncertainty humanity moved unseen and unchallenged, and fear continued to spread not as chaos but as awareness, and awareness once gained cannot be erased, and the galaxy was becoming aware that Earth was no longer a quiet member of the community but a force that had remembered who it was and chosen to act, and that knowledge alone was enough to change everything. The peace talks began the moment fear became too heavy to ignore, because when worlds feel unsafe, leaders reach for words hoping they can repair what actions have broken, and messages started flowing toward Earth filled with regret, concern, and promises of investigation and reform, and many of those messages spoke of misunderstanding and tragedy as if careful language could soften what had been done, and others offered compromises, borders, resources, shared security, all things that once would have mattered, but Earth did not respond, and that silence was its answer because humans understood that peace offered after punishment is feared is not peace, it is survival instinct, and survival instinct is temporary and fragile, and inside Earth's command centers every message was read, recorded, and dismissed not out of arrogance but clarity, because the moment for words had passed with the first civilian strike, and humans had learned through painful history that agreements made under fear are broken. The moment fear fades, and Earth had no intention of allowing that cycle to repeat, and when alien diplomats demanded a reply saying the galaxy deserved to be heard, Earth finally spoke, not through speeches or broadcasts, but through a single controlled transmission sent to every major system at once, and the message was short and without emotion, stating talks were offered before the crime and ignored, and talks after the crime changed nothing, and that one sentence ended centuries of diplomatic tradition because it told the galaxy that Earth no longer measured justice by discussion but by outcome, and the reaction was immediate as some worlds protested, calling Earth extreme, while others fell silent, realizing that the moral ground they claimed had been burned away by their own inaction, and among the race that committed the atrocity, panic grew as they understood that no apology would reach Earth and no council vote would stop what was coming, and internal messages leaked showing fear and confusion as leaders argued over whether to resist or surrender, but surrender requires someone willing to accept it, and Earth was not listening, and as negotiations collapsed across the galaxy, human fleets moved again, not in large obvious formations, but in small precise groups, striking supply routes, command relays, and strategic nodes with careful timing and limited force, each strike sending the same message without words that Earth chose targets not randomly but deliberately, and that it could reach anywhere and withdraw before a response formed, and these actions were not announced but discovered after the fact, which made them more terrifying because anticipation is easier than surprise, and the galaxy found itself reacting instead of planning, always one step behind, and with every unanswered plea for peace the realization deepened that Earth was not angry, it was resolved, and that distinction mattered because anger burns out while resolve endures, and human resolve was being tested now and proving unbreakable, and on Earth people watched the news of failed talks and distant strikes with quiet acceptance because they understood that peace built on fear of consequence is the only peace that lasts, and that justice delayed for comfort becomes injustice again, and some asked if Earth would ever stop, and leaders answered honestly that Earth would stop when the lesson was learned, not when apologies were offered, and that honesty spread through the population, creating unity not through excitement but through shared understanding, and alien populations began to protest as well, questioning their leaders, asking why humans were pushed so far and why warnings were ignored, and those questions weakened authority faster than any weapon because doubt spreads faster than fear, and fear spreads faster than fire, and as days passed without response to peace offers, some races withdrew their support from the guilty alliance, declaring neutrality or condemnation, hoping to protect themselves, but Earth noted these actions without comment because timing matters and late morality does not erase early silence, and the race responsible for the crime found itself alone, watched by former allies and hunted by uncertainty, and when they finally sent a desperate message offering surrender, Earth responded not with acceptance but with clarification, stating surrender is meaningless without accountability, and accountability will be enforced, and that message ended all remaining hope that words could save them, and the galaxy understood then that Earth had redefined peace not as the absence of conflict, but as the absence of threat, and threats are removed, not negotiated, and as human operations continued with calm precision, peace talks across the galaxy slowly died, replaced by preparation and fear, and the realization that Earth's answer had already been given, not in language, but in action, and that answer was final, and as stars dimmed and alliances shifted, one truth settled over every world that listened, which was that Earth would not be moved by pleas once ignored, and that mercy asked for after cruelty is not mercy at all, and the age of talking first was over, and the age of consequence had fully begun. When humanity began to fight as one, the galaxy noticed a change that went beyond ships and weapons, because for the first time Earth no longer acted as many nations, but as a single will, and that unity was something the stars had never faced before, as borders that once divided humans lost meaning and old rivalries faded into memory, replaced by a shared purpose born from loss and resolve, and on Earth factories in distant regions worked together without competition, sharing resources, plans, and labor. Because efficiency mattered more than profit, and survival mattered more than pride, and soldiers trained side by side regardless of origin, speaking different languages but following the same commands and trusting the same strategy, and that trust became humanity's greatest strength, because unity removes hesitation, and hesitation is where wars are lost, and alien intelligence struggled to understand this shift because they were used to fractured enemies divided by politics and fear, and humanity had once been that as well, but pain had stripped away what did not matter, leaving only what did, and that clarity spread through every level of human society, from the highest command to the lowest worker, and when human fleets moved again they did so in perfect coordination across multiple fronts, not overwhelming, but precise, like a system finally working as intended, and alien forces attempting to respond found themselves confused as attacks came from unexpected directions, using tactics borrowed from different human cultures combined into something new and unpredictable, and every engagement showed the same pattern. Humans adapted instantly, learning from each encounter and adjusting faster than alien commanders could react, and that speed of learning terrified them because it meant that even victories would become liabilities as humans would return improved and prepared. And across the galaxy, reports confirmed that Earth was no longer reacting to events but shaping them, controlling tempo. choosing where and when conflict occurred, and that control spread fear deeper than any single defeat because it removed hope of surprise or recovery, and within the alien alliance cracks widened as members argued over strategy and blame, because unity is hard to maintain under pressure and humans had learned that lesson long ago and now used it against others, and as coordinated human strikes dismantled communication networks, and isolated fleets alliances struggled to even share information while humanity shared everything instantly and securely, and that imbalance turned every battle into a lesson that favored Earth, and civilians across alien worlds watched as their leaders failed to respond effectively and began to question the strength of systems they once trusted, and those questions weakened morale, and morale is the quiet foundation of power, and as it crumbled resistance slowed and hesitation grew, and Earth pressed forward not with rage but with discipline, because discipline sustains effort when emotion fades, and human commanders emphasized control over destruction, choosing targets that crippled capability rather than causing unnecessary loss, and that choice reinforced the message that humanity was not seeking chaos but correction, and that distinction mattered to those watching because it showed that Earth still chose restraint where it could, even while refusing to be restrained by broken rules, and on Earth people felt the weight of unity as well as its cost, because unity demands sacrifice and patience, and not everyone agreed with every decision, but everyone agreed on the purpose, and that agreement held society steady through uncertainty and fear, and when losses came they were mourned collectively without blame, because blame divides and division was the one thing humanity could not afford, and as the campaign continued alien leaders began to realize that they were not facing a temporary coalition but a permanent change in human behavior, and that realization carried long-term consequences, because it meant that even if this conflict ended, the galaxy would never see the old Earth again, and some alien races began to quietly assist humanity, sharing intelligence or withdrawing support from the guilty, not out of loyalty but survival instinct, recognizing that unity backed by resolve is a force best avoided, and those shifts further isolated the main enemy, leaving them exposed and increasingly desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes, and mistakes create openings, and humanity was patient enough to wait for them, and as weeks turned into months the pattern became clear. Earth advanced not by overwhelming force but by steady pressure applied everywhere at once, and that pressure reshaped the strategic landscape, making resistance costly and retreat dangerous, and the galaxy slowly understood that humanity fighting as one was not just a moment but a state, and that state could not be easily broken because it was built on shared memory and shared loss and shared determination, and when historians would later study this period they would note that the true turning point was not a single battle or weapon, but the moment humans decided that unity was no longer optional but essential, and that decision changed the balance of power more than any fleet ever could, and as the stars watched humanity move forward together with calm purpose and unyielding focus, one truth became impossible to ignore: that a divided Earth had once been manageable, but a united Earth was something entirely different, and the galaxy was running out of time to adapt to that reality. The last mistake was not made by humans, because humans rarely make mistakes when the cost is known, and the stakes are survival. It was made by the alien alliance that had believed fear and negotiation could stop Earth, and that belief now crumbled as desperation spread through their ranks, and commanders gave orders without consultation, and soldiers moved without clear strategy, and in that chaos they reached for weapons that were forbidden long ago. Weapons so dangerous that even mentioning them caused fear in their own people, and they deployed them without fully understanding the consequences, thinking that one massive strike could undo everything humans had built. But humans had anticipated many possibilities, and they had prepared for every weapon known, and some that were not known, and when the forbidden weapon activated across space, it did not behave as the aliens expected. It did not destroy humans instantly or overwhelm their defenses. It faltered, it misfired, it exposed weakness in the enemy's own control, and human fleets responded instantly, exploiting every flaw as if the alien commanders had handed victory directly to them, and while some aliens panicked others tried to retreat, but human coordination was too precise, every move tracked and countered before it began, and when the forbidden weapon caused collateral damage it affected only alien forces, not humans, because humanity had planned redundancies and shields and strategies layered to absorb attacks and turn them against the attacker, and that efficiency terrified the galaxy because it proved that humans had not only predicted the strike but had already written the countermeasure before the attack began. And inside Earth's command rooms no one celebrated, because humanity does not celebrate disasters, it studies them, and they watched the results in cold precision, noting every outcome for later, and the alien alliance began to fracture as members argued over what went wrong and who was to blame, and blame was useless because the truth was already clear. They had underestimated humans for centuries, and that underestimation had become their fatal mistake, and in desperation some attempted to flee through hidden gates or jump points, but humans had already secured the network, mapping every path and exit, and when a few managed to escape they found themselves isolated and vulnerable, and one by one their positions fell, not because humans were reckless but because they were precise and patient, and the Forbidden Weapon became a symbol of their failure, and when alien diplomats tried to reopen peace talks, Earth answered only with action, not words, striking the next strategic target not with anger but with inevitability, and that inevitability carried a weight far heavier than bombs or fleets because it proved that humans had learned from history and the galaxy could not escape it, and reports flowed back to remaining alien worlds, showing devastation not indiscriminate but controlled and calculated. And fear spread even faster than destruction because everyone understood that humans were not done, and what humans had shown with the first target multiplied with every engagement. Now it was clear that restraint had limits, and the limit had been reached, and inside alien governments panic grew as communications failed, coordination collapsed, and confidence died, and some leaders attempted last-minute alliances hoping strength in numbers could resist humanity, but humanity no longer reacted to threats. It shaped them, and the combined forces found themselves outmaneuvered before they even realized the battle had begun, and as human fleets pressed forward the final plan unfolded not in haste, but with deliberate precision, removing each layer of opposition systematically, and while some alien soldiers fought bravely, their effort was scattered and uncoordinated, and humans exploited every weakness with calm efficiency, and even allies of the guilty could do nothing to stop it because Earth's unity and preparation was unstoppable. And when the final assault began on the alien command center, humans did not rush. They moved slowly, encircling and isolating every node and system, ensuring no escape, and every strike was calculated to disable, not destroy, the infrastructure of control, while preserving resources to demonstrate that humanity did not act out of vengeance but necessity. And as the command center fell, alien leaders realized their last mistake had doomed them, because humans had not only prepared for war, they had prepared for failure and collapse, and in that collapse they thrived. And as the final communications died across the alien alliance, Earth broadcast nothing, because there was nothing left to say. The lesson had been delivered in action, not words, and the galaxy absorbed the reality that no weapon, no threat, and no deception could match the foresight and coordination of humanity when it fought as one. And even after the last strike, humans did not celebrate or gloat. They merely secured positions, repaired losses, and prepared for the next phase if needed, because victory is not final until security is guaranteed. And the last mistake by the alien alliance became a permanent lesson written across systems and stars, and every world that watched understood that humanity could not be underestimated again, and that when humans decide, the rules no longer apply and act with precision, patience, and unity, they become something no calculation can predict. And the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as Earth completed the final steps in turning fear into control and chaos into order, and the galaxy learned that the last mistake had not been a misfire or accident, it had been the moment the Alliance guaranteed its own end. When the smoke cleared and the last signal from the alien alliance faded into silence, the galaxy finally understood what Earth had become: not a nation, not a planet, not a single people, but a force of will shaped by centuries of struggle and loss, a civilization that had learned to survive by restraint, and now survived by action. And humans did not celebrate the victories, because celebration is for those who do not remember the cost, and Earth remembered every city lost, every life taken, every innocent destroyed, and that memory was its compass, guiding every decision with clarity and precision. And across the planet people moved quietly, repairing damage, tending the wounded, and preparing for the future, knowing that peace was no longer guaranteed and survival required vigilance. And in the days after the war, humanity did not parade its power or declare triumph, it simply acted as one coherent entity, maintaining security, coordinating fleets, rebuilding infrastructure, and ensuring that no one could threaten the innocent again. And that combination of discipline and purpose became the new measure of strength, because Earth no longer needed approval or recognition from the galaxy to exist. It only needed to act according to principle, and that principle was simple: protect humanity, and the innocent act decisively against those who violate it, and learn from every encounter. And everywhere humans looked, they saw reminders of what had been and what could have been lost, and they honored the dead, not with monuments, but with action, making sure that no atrocity would ever go unanswered again. And across alien space, former allies and enemies alike observed the new reality with a mixture of fear and awe, because Earth had proven that it could strike anywhere at any time with precision, restraint, and unity, and that demonstration forced every species to reconsider assumptions about power, diplomacy, and human capability. And the lesson was clear: humans are patient, but they are not weak. Humans forgive, but they do not forget. Humans hold laws as sacred, but when those laws fail, the consequences are swift and unavoidable. And inside human command centers, decisions were still made with care, because understanding power requires discipline, and knowing limits requires reflection. And the galaxy slowly adjusted to a world that no longer asked permission, and no longer relied on fear alone for protection. And humans themselves adjusted as well, because the burden of knowing their own strength is heavy, and responsibility is heavier. And across cities, families lived their lives aware that the world had changed, but also aware that survival and unity had given them a future they had almost lost. And children grew learning stories of courage, patience, and consequence, not as legends, but as reality. And schools taught history with honesty, showing both the mistakes of the past and the resolve of the present. And governments functioned as coordinated networks, not divided states, and every citizen understood that cooperation was no longer optional, it was survival, and in the stars the remnants of the alien alliance reorganized quietly in pockets, but none dared challenge Earth directly, because the memory of the first strike, and the precision of the last mistake, haunted every commander and every fleet, and whispers spread that humanity had become something beyond ordinary civilizations, something the galaxy would never underestimate again, and even neutral races began to respect Earth not out of loyalty or fear, but understanding that restraint and power together create a force that is unmatched, and across distant world scholars debated what had changed in humans that made them so formidable, and the answer was always the same: humans had learned to be civilized, not because it was easy, but because they chose it, and when that choice was broken they adapted quickly and decisively, and that combination of principle and action defined the new era of human existence, and on Earth there was no triumphalism, only vigilance and resolve, because true strength is not in victory, but in the ability to endure and protect what matters most, and as fleets patrolled borders, rebuilt stations, and coordinated across systems, humans understood that their civilization had grown beyond the old definitions, and that the galaxy would now measure humanity not by treaties or alliances, but by deeds and consequence, and the final realization settled over every corner of human space that they were no longer merely one species among many. They were a standard, a warning, and a promise to the universe that civilization is a choice and survival is a rule, and when humans act together with patience, clarity, and unity, nothing can stand against them, and the stars themselves seemed to shift, acknowledging that a new era had begun, because Earth had become more than a world, it had become a force guided by memory and principle, and when future historians looked back they would note that the moment humanity stopped asking permission and chose to act decisively was the moment the galaxy changed forever, and the lesson of restraint, preparation, unity, and consequence would echo across generations for all time, and that is what Earth became: a civilization that remembers, a civilization that acts, a civilization that ensures that justice and survival are one and the same, and the galaxy understood finally that from now on humanity would not be underestimated, ignored, or taken lightly, because Earth had shown what it could do and what it would do, and that knowledge alone reshaped the balance of power among the stars forever.